Alright guys, so I thought I'd do my own video because I saw a lot of videos that were wrong on this particular job, and so as I am figuring out how to do it myself the correct way, I thought I'd put together a video to help other people out who are probably struggling with the same kind of situations. This is my 2010 Ford F150. I'm doing the front brakes. I'm going to replace both the brake pads and the actual rotors. The rotor on the other side was only measuring out to 34 millimeters, and 32 millimeters is your minimum thickness on the rotors before you get them turned. So I bought new ones. Plus there was on the other side, on this back side of the rotor, there was some pretty deep, palpable grooves that the old brake pads had worn into there. So anyway, this is how you go about it. The first thing that you really need to do is to jack up your car safely on jack stands, and then in the engine compartment down there where the brake fluid reservoir is, unscrew the cap so that it allows for expansion of the fluid, because you're going to be compressing the pistons within the cylinder, or within the pistons within the caliper, and you don't want to overpressure the system, or have it squirt out at the other path of least resistance, which, yeah, you don't want that. So anyway, is to undo that, I've already taken a C-clamp and compressed very briefly, I mean like a small amount, onto my brake pad, and then gotten the back of the caliper with this C-clamp. So you just kind of bring it in here like that, make sure that you're on the brake pad and the back side of the caliper. Because on most old calipers there's a little bit of this rust ridge right here, and if you just try and take the caliper off and the pads off, you're going to run into a little bit of difficulty. So this should just kind of help make your process easier. So you get it all set up, do a couple turns, take it off, do another couple turns, and then it'll be a lot easier to take off. You can kind of see it's already wobbly. I did put this back together just for demonstration purposes to show you guys. And then for me, a lot of the other models, it's an actual, like a hex socket head, like those key wrenches, but on a socket. Mine's a 6-point hex regular socket, 13 millimeter, to take the caliper pins off. And again, I've already loosened these, but if they're real stuck, which yours probably will be if you have any amount of rust, I took a pair of lock pliers like this to hook onto these flat surfaces on both sides, clamp that down, and then you can use your breaker bar to break the bolts loose. So you got one up top here for a caliper pin sliding bolt, and then one right down here. So after I've gotten those bolts off and set safely to the side, you remove this, and I have my twist tie thing already preloaded on the bracket for the coil spring. It's up here. But you just swing this off to the side. You don't want to let the weight of the caliper hang from your brake hose, and you don't want to put too much stress in it. So you hang it off to the side, make sure it's nice and secure, and get that going. And we'll come back to this later, because in order to install the new brake pads, you're gonna decompress these pistons all the way down into the caliper to allow for that new room, because you're going to have more meat on your brake pads and both that and your rotors. Alright, and then next, it should be fairly easy to get these wiggled out, and you can kind of finagle them however you'd like. Since I know I'm replacing both my rotor and my brake pads, I don't care about marring the surface, and so I'm going to stick a flat-headed screwdriver in there just to kind of shimmy it out. And so and then two, I try and leave them oriented so that when I install the new pads, I can it'll help to line things up. And then I'll come in here and get the other one. And then line it down so it's all lined up and you know which way they insert, because these are different. If you can see, you have like these little Garfield ears, and they have to go on the back, which lines up with the pistons in your caliper. So there is a certain orientation to them. You can't put this one on the front, you'll run into some problems. So anyway, I lay those down so that you know exactly which way they're oriented. And then to get these clips off, I found it easiest just to stick a needle nose plier in there, kind of rotate forward or forward and away, and doing the same thing on the back side. So now all we have left to get the rotor off is this caliper bracket. But while everything is still kind of dirty, I'm gonna go ahead and pull this back up front to clean it out, because that way, you know, even if I get some brake dust or whatnot, some rust onto here, this surface, it's gonna come off anyway. The first thing you need to do would be to compress these pistons, and I have a special tool just for that. Let me grab it. So I picked this up at Harbor Freight. It's really pretty stinking cheap, but it fits right down in the bore of the cylinder. I'm gonna have to make it smaller to fit it in there. But this is the portion that you really want to make sure that your brake fluid cap on the reservoir underneath your engine, in your engine compartment underneath the hood, is unscrewed, because you don't want that just to then compress this cylinder or push somewhere else in the system. But this is how it fits in, and then as you can see, as you just turn this, it'll push the bottom of this piston down in there, and then so you'll do it on this side and then also on this side. So this is at the end of the process. I've bottomed out on this one. I did want to make mention there's good reason while you're decompressing the fluid, your brake fluid, is to open up this port, have a tube connected to it, and drain the fluid that's kind of in the pistons, because that's the fluid that gets the hottest. Because in all reality, the brake fluid, it doesn't really move much. You know, it's the smallest amount when you actually apply your brakes and let go. So knowing, like, you know, how brakes heat up because of the friction and all that, the fluid that's sitting down in these behind your pistons in your caliper is a good idea to then just kind of drain it. It'd be best to use a vacuum setup, but either way, to drain that brake fluid out. Personally, I'm going to be completely flushing the brake fluid right after this job is done. And I'm going to do all 4 wheels the correct way, so I didn't opt to do that. But if you're at an interval where you don't need to change your brake fluid yet, which should be every 2 years, by the way, then you could just do that and, you know, kind of do the job completely by getting rid of that fluid, and still be okay. But anyway, that's a thought. And then the other thing that I like to do is keep that, once you bottom out on it, keep it for a couple seconds just to kind of let that fluid kind of re-equalize. And then you can see from this other side, it's the smallest amount, but it did rebound a little bit. I find that if you leave this compressed for a couple seconds, it rebounds less. I don't know if there's any truth to that, but that's what I do, and I feel like it helps. Then what I do is just grab a wire brush, and all the contact points here for the brake pads on these ears, and then also the front of this, of your piston, and then also the connection points for the bolts. I just kind of give it a quick general cleanup, maybe kind of shake it off, and then follow it up with some brake cleaner so it's nice and clean surface. You don't want to take away too much metal, so I wouldn't use anything too aggressive. Just a hand wire brush is perfect. Alright, so I've sprayed off my caliper. You can see kind of the residue, it's starting to dry. I do want to make mention that if you're in the winter like I am and in a closed off garage, it would really help to get some cross ventilation. So I have my heater that's cranking out up there. It's a natural gas fed infrared that I installed, but I opened up my back man door to allow some fresh air to come in, and then opposite of that I have this exhaust system set up with my box fan. So I just kind of custom made a piece of cardboard to fit up underneath this last lip on the garage door, and then I have this fan set to exhaust the air out. And I do that for a good couple hours or so after I spray that brake fluid, because I guess it depletes the oxygen in the air. I use the full-on chlorinated stuff because it's more effective. And you, yeah, just want to make sure you can breathe. The respirator would not help. If there's anyone thinking about that, it's respirators are for particulates only, so it wouldn't be helpful. But you need some cross ventilation. So that's how I do it in the dead of the winter, but still make it comfortable enough to keep working on cars. All right, so the next we need to do to get this caliper bracket off is there's a couple bolts back here. They're pretty heavy duty and they're held on by red Loctite, believe it or not. So I use my impact gun, of course in reverse, to get them off. This is a 21 millimeter bolt head, just like the lug nuts were. So that kind of makes it nice. Then you got one socket for both jobs. So anyway, I'll take these off next. So this is the caliper bracket and it's now off. So I'll just set this down because I'm going to clean this up, remove these, the caliper sliding pins, and kind of take off all the old grease and re-lubricate those with some silicone paste. But here's the bolt. This thing is quite beefy, and you can see this is that the red Loctite that held it in. So when you go to replace these after you clean them up, make sure you put some more red Loctite back on those threads, and put it closer towards this end, even though it's kind of showing right here in the middle. That way it'll kind of penetrate all the threads and it'll get to where it's actually functioning. Another word I just wanted to make, anytime you're using power tools, especially like an air impact gun or anything that's really air driven operated, make sure you wear hearing protection and eye protection as well. Alright, so these caliper sliding pins, whatever you want to call them, they're just on a rubber boot, so you kind of take them off like that and then remove them this way as well. I would clean all three surfaces, both the sliding pin, inside the boot, and inside this little chamber. Just wipe it down, nothing fancy, and then put that new silicone paste on it, and then just reassemble it. I also wanted to make mention of how I clean small pieces like this, because it goes down pretty far in there. So the end of the Q-tip, I rough it up just enough to kind of just make it bigger and you know, be able to hold more grit and goo, but don't rough it up so much that it's like falling off the end. But anyway, you can use that to clean down in there, and then you just throw these guys away. It's pretty nasty down in there. Okay, and then on the caliper bracket, once you clean off the caliper slide pins and re-lubricate them and get them all back installed with the dust boots seated in those grooves, what I would take is that same wire brush and kind of get, again, the mating surfaces, so where the bolts go on, just to kind of make a clean surface. And then two, these grooves right here is where those clips that we took out at the beginning sit in, and that's what where the calipers slide in and out on. So I think what we should do is just clean those up really good so that those clips sit nice and flush and true, and there's no, you know, real big ridges or grooves or anything like that. Just kind of get some of the surface rust off. So if this rotor is anything like my other side, it was extremely hard to get off. I took anything from my dead blow hammer, and I think this is the 6-pound one, and my rubber mallet, and I was banging over all these places. Nothing was coming off. It wasn't budging, just like this one is. So what I found to do, and I think this is maybe even why they make the rotor this way, is there's two holes opposite each other, and the only thing behind here is that flat surface of the wheel bearing. It's not machined. It doesn't need to stay, you know, any kind of surface, any smooth surface or anything like that. So what I've done on this other side, my dad helped me out with this, so props to Papa, is to get those down in tight and then grab whatever wrench fits over that and then just start turning it. Boom, you hear that? It's breaking apart. There you go. And there's that other side. Look at that. And then it come right off. And then you can just take your bolts back out. And again, you didn't damage anything. This doesn't need to stay a machine surface. It's all rusted. And then to prevent this, what I will do is this anti-seize. The copper formula is good for the high temperature. And so I'll just paint this surface, even though my new rotor has got like an anti-corrosion finish on it. This will further ensure if I ever have to come into here in the future and do another brake job, turn the rotors, whatever, anytime I'm going to have to remove that, it's not going to then stick like it just did now. So if you see on this, the minimum thickness, MINTHK, is stamped onto the rotor itself. I'm fairly certain not all rotors are like this, but mine are. Either way, the shop that you get your rotors turned at will have some kind of a chart that they adhere to. But for mine, it's stamped right on here. It's 32.0 millimeters thickness. So if I take my caliper, make sure it's zeroed out, and I measure the thickness, I'm right at 33.85. So I only have less than 2 millimeters to go. They're going to take off at least that with the machining process to make this a nice, clean and smooth surface. So it wouldn't be worth it for me to even try. So that's why I've already bought new rotors, and I know that they're going to have to be replaced. All right, this is the high temperature anti-seize that I was talking about earlier, but really just kind of coming around, and I'll take my probably a gloved finger and spread it out even better. But the goal is just to get most of this surface so that it won't seize up in the future. So just spread that around. Don't be shy with it. So these are my brand new rotors. I ended up going with the Bosch Quiet Cast. They are they have an anti-corrosion protection, and they're supposed to be a really quiet braking material. So hopefully they'll work well for me. But if you see on my rotor, I have the that copper anti-seize all spread out, so I'm ready to put my rotor on here, line it up, and then just for simplicity, for during my install, what I'll do is take 2 lug nuts opposite each other. See how it's kind of wanting to come off? That way it just holds itself on there, and it'll make it easier to put the brake pads and caliper bracket and caliper back on. So then once the rotor's installed, I want to make sure I wipe both surfaces, especially this back one, because it's going to be hard to get once you install everything else with this brake dust shield that's on there. So make sure you get a brand new rag that's nice and clean as rags get. You spray some brake cleaner on there, and then what I'll do is wipe that surface and then rotate and make sure I get all the way around. So then next, you put your caliper bracket back on. I thread the bolts at least a good amount, a couple turns or so by hand, just to make sure that the threads are seated, because you don't want to cross thread this for sure. This is 136 foot-pounds for my model year. You have to look up either your Chilton's manual, or I'm sure you can Google it online and get the foot-pounds of force that you're supposed to be using for yours. But to do kind of a stepwise approach, I'll do this 65 foot-pounds and then 100 foot-pounds, and then I'll torque each with my actual torque wrench set at 136 foot-pounds, just to kind of get that stepwise approach and make sure it's nice and even and snug and to specs. This is one of the reasons why I chose to even make this video. I saw a guy changing his brake and setting his torque specs, which honestly a lot of people don't even use a torque wrench. You should, but if you're going to use one, use it properly. He was grabbing the torque wrench kind of mid shaft on the handle right here. And torque wrenches are specifically designed and calibrated to apply a force so far of a distance from your fulcrum point, which in the case of a torque wrench is where your socket attaches. Where this knurled handle is, that's where you need to apply the force. Otherwise, you're not going to get an accurate torque reading. So the next order of business is to install these clips. They're stainless steel, kind of like a spring clip. They are designed, or they come brand new with a new set of pads, or at least mine did, the ones that I brought. But they just kind of, this lip comes over on that, and then what I do, because it's really tight and really hard to push down on your own, is very gently, because you also don't want to overstretch the spring, is take a needle nose plier to help just kind of finagle that in. So that's nice and solid in there. And you repeat that same process for all four. There's 2 on this front side and 2 on this back side. What I want to do first is wipe down or spray down this surface real good with some brake cleaner. So I'll do that real quick. Oops. So I'll do that, let it kind of dry a little bit, and then I'll get my other one and do the same thing. I got this pad on pretty easily, but then for whatever reason I actually struggled on the outside one on the other side as well. But the original stainless steel clips that it came with, I would, got them seated just fine, but for whatever reason the ears that the brake pad fit into, it just didn't want to budge. The clearances were too tight. I couldn't get it on there unless I took a hammer to it, but then that, distorted the stainless steel clips, and then it was pushing it against the rotor, and you can see some of my scratch marks here. So I was getting real frustrated, and I ended up bending some of the metal, so I went back to the auto parts store and picked up this hardware kit. And it actually includes the rubber boots, but since these are functioning, I'll just keep it for the next time I do my boots, or next time I do a brake job. But anyway, it came with 8 more of these clips, and at first I was a little bummed because they were looked like they were painted black. I figured it was inferior metal and it wasn't stainless, whatever. But these are really slick. I already installed the ones on the other side, and these of course just snap right into place like the other ones do. But you'll see, I mean, I was really struggling with these brake pads, but they install so much better. And maybe I can kind of demonstrate that for you here. So those mount just like the old ones did. And then hopefully I can get this on in one foul swoop for you. But you kind of rock it in here so you're staying towards that edge, that lip, and then you just press it in there. These are buggers. No, it's not going, and again, if I try and use a hammer, then it's just gonna distort these clips, and it looks like these ones already wanting to fall off, so I'll probably replace this. What I might do is take a little bit of sandpaper and kind of clean up this edge. You can kind of see a little bit where it's already a little messed up from me trying to hammer it in. But yeah, if anyone else runs into this too and has a better solution, leave a comment in the comment section below. But that's what I'm going to do, is just take a little bit of pretty fine grit, maybe like a 200 or 400 grit sandpaper, and just clean up that edge, maybe even round this forward edge a little bit so that it slips in easier. Oh my goodness. Take number 13.5 is a charm. I can feel it. I feel like it shouldn't be that hard, but that's how it is. And it's not rubbing against the rotor, so. Alright, now that we got both the brake pads finally installed, and we made sure that these clips weren't rubbing against the rotor surface, I'm going to go ahead and wipe down this part. Again, we've already done the back, if you remember. We're going to wipe down this, because hopefully we wouldn't be in a position where we'd have to touch it again, so this will be kind of our final wipe. Alright, so there's that, and then we unclip our caliper, which has already been cleaned, and pistons pressed in. So for these, same thing with removal, and I have my torque wrench set to 36 because I just did that other side. But use these split lock pliers to kind of hold that caliper pin down because it is free flowing. And then use your other hand to tighten down the screw. And then once again, as before, if you're ready to set the torque, make sure you're only holding it at the handle, so you know you got as close as a measurement as you can possibly get. So there's one. Now I always kind of click it back again and make sure I really got it. Same thing with this bottom bolt. Alright, so we're pretty much done. I'm just going to take my lug nuts off. The next step would then be to reinstall your wheel. Of course, just making sure that you're going in some kind of a cross pattern when you torque it down. And since these, again, my make and model is calling for 150 foot-pounds. Most alloy wheels are around 95 to 110 or so, but this is calling for 150, so keep that in mind. What I would do is like a graduated torque setting to where you do like 65 and then 100 and then 150 or some, you know, combination thereof. But again, just make sure that you're doing some kind of a star pattern. We're going to leave the wheels off and do our brake fluid flush since we're done with the brake job now. But yeah, hopefully I helped some people out and you guys learned something, or maybe you saw something that I did kind of funky or a better way to do it. Just leave a comment, and thanks. Alright, so hours later, and honey in the background,